We have just an amazing guest, a very good friend of mine, but someone that I know this audience has come to know, love, and respect, and somebody who has been in the news quite a bit lately because of everything that she has been doing to stand up for America and especially for Jewish Americans. So I'd like to welcome to the show my very good friend, Congresswoman from New York, Elise Stefanik. Hi, Elise. How are you?
It is great to be with you, Morgan. I am so proud of you for this show, and I know that you have constituents in my district and across America who are so excited to listen to this every week.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think our audience probably doesn't know this, but Elise and I have been friends for about 10 years, or we've known each other even longer than that because we both worked in the Bush administration. But I was an early supporter of Elise's when she ran for Congress through a fundraiser for her in New York. I'm so proud to support her. And if our friend, former President Trump, is listening, she'd be a great vice president. But on to the things that we have to talk about today. There's so much on the agenda, Elise, but I want to start with really what was the breaking news last week. And that was, of course, we found out that Secretary Austin has cancer, prostate cancer, incredibly sad. But there appeared to be a total breakdown at the Pentagon over who was in charge, who was in control. People were in control that didn't even know they were in control because they were on vacation. Can you make sense for our audience of what exactly happened this week with Secretary Austin?
Well, I still think we're getting answers about what happened, Morgan. And I will tell you, I know you know this from your senior national security positions. I know this as a member of Congress and particularly a senior member on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. It is truly unthinkable and really shocking that the Secretary of Defense was undergoing major medical treatment, was out of contact, and did not notify the President, the National Security Council, the White House, and even the Deputy Secretary of the Pentagon, who was on vacation, was unaware. This creates very concerning lack of continuity of government. And I'll tell you, as you look around the world today, we are facing so many threats. And in my district, I represent the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, the most deployed division in the U.S. Army since 9/11. Currently, we have over 1,000 soldiers deployed in the Middle East. So to think that as American service members are being targeted by Iranian-backed terrorists, and by Iran, that we have the Secretary of Defense who is essentially AWOL and out of contact, that is unacceptable. I've called for his resignation. And the White House, you have seen, has been they put out very concerning rhetoric and statements from the podium. They've asked every cabinet secretary to put forth very specific plans when it comes to communicating with the White House, continuity of government. And it's why the House Armed Services Committee is conducting a formal inquiry to the lack of transparency. But I'm sure, Morgan, you find it shocking just given your senior level experience in the Trump administration in the national security space. This is unthinkable.
Yeah, completely. I think what's devastating, just from the perspective of this administration, is the White House had to come out and sort of say, well, we just learned about the cancer diagnosis today, which, is, of course, an incredibly sad thing. But we know that whenever you're in these important national security positions, especially when you're in the chain of command for the nuclear request, right? If the president, God forbid, had to launch a nuclear strike, the Secretary of Defense is in a chain of command for that. And when you're in that chain of command, you don't get the same privacy as others. I also saw that the Inspector General is coming out to investigate this. I know the Congress is as well. So we're super grateful on that point. Another thing I just want to transition to, which is something that you've been in the news for quite a bit lately, is what happened at Harvard. Now, just to take our audience back, it was actually, I think it's still been the most watched hearing on social media, but you were in front, you had the presidents of 3 universities in front of you, one of them being Harvard, to talk about anti-Semitism that was happening on their campuses. And they really, I'll just be honest, they made fools of themselves. So long story short, Harvard fought back, stood by the president, Claudine Gay. You kept going after her because you didn't think that her answers were acceptable. She also was exposed to many counts of plagiarism that were levied against her. So I want to sort of just get your thoughts. I know you talked about this a lot on the news, but I want to get your thoughts at just what happened in that initial hearing, because I can tell you when I saw your face and knowing you for 10 years and knowing how strong you are on the issues, you are a Harvard alum. When I saw your face, I thought you seemed totally shocked by the president's answers. And I don't know that I've really ever seen you look that way before in the hearing. So take our audience at least behind the scenes of what was going through your head while you were questioning them. And then, of course, also talk now that Harvard has gotten rid of Claudine Gay. Is there any way that they can fix their reputation, that they can, fix the decline, the brand decline that they've seen over the past month?
Well, you know me well, Morgan, because I was shocked and I was really astonished in real time. And I've been in a lot of congressional hearings over the past decade, and I've never heard more morally bankrupt testimony than at that hearing. And there is a reason that it is that now the most viewed congressional testimony in history of the United States Congress, with over 1 billion views in just a week. It's now multiple billions. And that's because of the pathetic answers from those three quote-unquote elite university presidents. Just to take your listeners into the room, that was the last question of the hearing. Previously in the hearing, I had asked the Harvard president questions. I was not getting direct answers. And I thought to myself, I asked the most junior member of our committee, a new freshman, if you have extra time, can you yield it to me? Because I want to ask one final moral question. And I tried to ask it in a way, Morgan, that would force and elicit a yes answer, which is why I asked very straightforward, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct on bullying and harassment? And I started with MIT, thinking MIT is a technical school. They're not as liberal in many ways, or sort of they haven't embraced this woke policy than Harvard and Penn. I was expecting MIT to say, yes, it does violate our university's code of conduct. And to my astonishment, all three university presidents says it depends on the context. And you heard Penn even go a step further and say, and it's dependent upon the conduct. You see my response to each of them. In addition to the shock, I said it does not depend on the context, and this is absolutely unacceptable, and that's why I've called for their resignations. What you cannot see in the video, but it's important for your listeners and really for everyone around the world to know this, is we had Jewish students from each of those schools who attended the hearing, and I could see them from where I was seated at the top of the dais, but they were not in the video shot. I could see how absolutely shaken and just so pained they were by these pathetic answers, these morally bankrupt answers of the presidents of the universities that they themselves attend. So this obviously set up off an earthquake in higher education that has been long overdue. And our investigation is going to be robust. It's already ongoing. After the hearing, it led to the forced resignations of the Penn president, and then later, after about a month, the Harvard president, and certainly the MIT president should also resign as well. But there is a lot more work to do. From my perspective, this is when the work really begins. And that means looking at these universities when it comes to their failed record. We've put out document requests regarding their failure to address the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, the DEI office's failure to stand up for and protect Jewish students, DEI offices, which are by definition anti-Semitic, the foreign funding piece, which is very important to look at, and then, of course, the U.S. taxpayer dollar funds. Billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer funds go to these higher ed institutions. We need to have oversight and address this. So a lot of work ahead. I'm engaged in this every single day.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Elise. It is the fact that you have this big, massive platform and that you are standing up for our students and for our kids around America and for Jewish Americans. It has been so devastating in the aftermath of the attacks of October 7th to feel this rampant anti-Semitism increase, not only around the world in the United States. I feel like it's got to be the worst period of anti-Semitism in the history of the United States. And it's just not acceptable. And to see you and your massive platform be willing to and able to stand up for us and to be our voice is something that I know that means so much to so many people. On that, we also know that anti-Semitism is pretty pervasive in New York as well. We even saw last week on Monday, a pro-Palestinian mob blocked traffic, 3 major bridges during rush hour. They said that they wanted to make people understand how Palestinians feel trapped in a place that they cannot leave. We saw a lot of these guys arrested, thankfully. But I guess I'm wondering, what do you think has happened? Like, was anti-Semitism always there and just sort of lying underneath the surface, and we didn't notice it? And what else should President Biden and his team be doing to tamp down on this anti-Semitic streak in the U.S.? And especially, it seems like so many of it's coming from New York.
Well, unfortunately, Morgan, we know that anti-Semitism is a historic challenge, but it's really bubbling over in the surface. And certainly in my lifetime, I've never seen what we're seeing today, whether it's on college campuses, whether it's in the halls of Congress, frankly, with this rise of anti-Semitism within the Democrat Party from members of the squad. And, it should not be difficult to take a vote to condemn anti-Semitism in Congress, and yet over 100 Democrats voted against that resolution condemning anti-Semitism. I think the Biden administration needs to be much more strong when it comes to their support of Israel and call out those in the Democrat Party who are contributing to this rise in anti-Semitism, and they have refused to do that. For example, they should have pushed hard to make sure every Democrat voted for that resolution to condemn anti-Semitism, and you saw, as I said, over 100 Democrats did not. And I will tell you, while the White House press secretary condemned the university presidents, we did not hear it from the president of the United States himself, Joe Biden, and he is a former professor at Penn, and he should have spoken out. Instead, what we saw, for example, from prominent Democrat leaders like Barack Obama was pleading with Harvard University to keep the president former president, who put that, historically morally bankrupt testimony into the record. So there's so much work that needs to be done. In the national security space, I will tell you, we are absolutely committed to making sure that our most precious ally, Israel, has the resources and support they need. And I've been proud to do that on the House Armed Services Committee and proud to do that on the Education Committee as well. But there's so much work to do. I will also tell you I've introduced legislation that was signed into law, the Never Again Holocaust Education Act, which is for K through 12 schools to make sure that there's federal grant monies available for teaching the historic lessons of the Holocaust, because never again is now, and we need to obviously do so much more work in educating our young people especially.
I could not agree more. And again, thank you so much, Elise Stefanik, Congressman from New York, for doing that. We have just a few minutes left of your time. You've given us so much, but another massive item, and what I think is probably, Elise, our most important and pressing national security issue is our border. And going back to New York, where you represent, it was again in the news this week because on Wednesday, high school students, I want to say this again to make sure that our listeners totally understand this. High school students were actually dismissed from school to make room for at least close to 2,000 illegal immigrants who are going to use their school as a temporary overnight respite center, whatever that means. So you've got a totally undefended and unsecure border where you have millions of people since the beginning of the Biden administration coming over it. We know that people on the terror watch list are on that border. We also know, by the way, that these children who are affected are the same children who went a year or two without being in school because of draconian policies related to COVID that kept them at home. And now these parents are going to have to adjust to work and adjust to other life schedules and keep their kids at home so that their school can house illegal immigrants. Tell me, Elise Stefanik, on what planet does that make any sense?
The border crisis, I will tell you, is the number one issue. That and inflation, those are the number one issues that I hear from in my district. And the border crisis, every state is a border state. We say that because we mean it. And New York, we've just seen the catastrophe that Biden's failed border policies have caused. In New York, you even have Democrat mayors like Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, speaking out so loudly critical of Joe Biden's presidency. And the sad irony there, Morgan, is this same Democrat mayor also advocated for sanctuary city policies and sanctuary state policies in New York, which have, led to this border crisis. The fact that this week you had students dismissed and moved towards online learning to allow the school to house 2,000 illegal immigrants, it is fundamentally un-American. It is unbelievable. We know the significant learning loss that results from students when they're not able to be in the classroom. And actually, it's very important to point out, House Republicans passed a bill to not allow illegals to be housed in our schools. And you know what? Chuck Schumer refused to take up that bill in the Senate. But we passed that bill, barring that in the House, and we're very proud to have gotten that done. We passed that months ago. And it's not just a crisis from the southern border, Morgan. I represent a large swath of the U.S.-Canadian border in New York State, and we've seen a nearly 800% increase in illegal crossings on the U.S.-Canadian border in the sector that I represent, including individuals who are on the terror watch list coming not just across our southern border, but our northern border as well. We passed the Secure the Border Act, House Republicans did, and unfortunately not a single Democrat voted for it. But we know the policies that work. Those are President Trump's border policies, and that was the most secure border in my lifetime, and we need to return those policies. So this is an issue that's not going away for Democrats. They see this in the polling. 84% of New Yorkers, for example, think the border is a crisis. And New York is traditionally a blue state. So a lot of those people answering, yes, it's a crisis, are registered Democrats. We will secure the border when we win back the Senate and win back the White House. But House Republicans have done our job.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, final question on House Republicans doing their job, the hearing started this week for impeaching Secretary Mayorkas for his failure to secure the border. What stuck out to you at those hearings, and will it have any effect? Do we think that Secretary Mayorkas will be impeached, and will that have an effect on what President Biden is doing, or rather, should I say, is not doing at the border?
It will have an effect. We have a responsibility in our oversight capacity to hold these administrations and departments accountable when they're failing to do their job. In Secretary Mayorkas' case, he is failing to execute the law. He is testifying under oath that our border is secure. The failed policies of Joe Biden that are being executed by Secretary Mayorkas as the Homeland Security Secretary have literally led to the deaths of Americans in the fentanyl overdoses. If you look, that's the leading cause of death of young American adults aged 18 to 35 in this country. And yet you have Secretary Mayorkas saying that the border is secure. Americans are smart. They see through that. But it's our job to hold these secretaries and departments accountable, and we're doing that.
Well, I can't thank you enough for joining me. For our audience, I know they love hearing from you, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from the great state of New York, of course, my friend. And as you know, I'll continue to be your PR person and say should also be Donald Trump's pick for vice president. So thank you so much, Elise, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Morgan. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you. Thank you to all the listeners.
All right. Thanks. And thanks to our audience for listening. Again, this is Morgan Ortagus from